To shape the headstock, I used an angle gauge to mark up each side the same and then cut out the shape on the bandsaw. Then I used whatever was to hand to mark up a shape for the top of the headstock, which happened to be the handles of a pair of scissors. I cut that shape on the bandsaw too and then refined it on the belt sander. Then I shaped the bottom of the headstock with a rasp and then a file, and then sanded up to 120 grit. To fit the machine heads, I placed them where I wanted them by eye, and then marked up the centre of the holes for the shaft with an ice pick. These holes would help to centre the drill bit. And I drilled the holes on the drill press. Then I could push the shafts through the holes and attach the gear with a screw. Then I marked up the holes with an ice pick again to attach the machine heads to the headstock. With the machine heads fitted, I realised I wasn't happy with the shape of the headstock. It looked a bit too big, so I took it back to the bandsaw to make a few refinements. I used a carving knife to shape the corner. The top of the headstock looked a bit big too, so I trimmed that down on the bandsaw and then shaped it again on the belt sander. To create the neck block, I laminated together some offcuts of mahogany to make a neck block that was the size I needed. Once the glue had dried, I cleaned up the faces of the block on the cross-cut sled on the table saw. Then I marked up the centre of the neck block and the centre of the dovetail joint and lined up the two marks so that I could mark up the dovetail. I cut the dovetail joint on the bandsaw, making sure to stay inside the line so that I could refine the shape with a chisel to get a good fit. It took a few attempts to get the joint to fit, so I just kept making refinements using the chisel and some sandpaper. What I'm about to try next in the video is quite an unconventional way of making a ukulele. Usually you'd make a neck, and then the body with a neck block inside, and then join the neck to the neck block in the body. But I thought I'd try a different way and actually build the body around the neck block. When the joint finally seated properly, I could glue it up. I wanted to leave a gap at the top of the neck block, which would be the depth of the soundboard, and I had an offcut that was the same thickness as the soundboard would be to use as a spacer. So as soon as the dovetail joint was flush with the spacer, I knew that the dovetail joint was in the correct position and I could leave it to dry. I'd use a reclaimed oak handrail to make the sides for the ukulele, I cut it to length on the miter saw and then cut off the curved sides. Then I set my bandsaw fence to 4mm and ripped a thin slice. I then ran the block through the jointer to get a flat face and then ripped another slice. And did the same again too, which gave me 3 thin slices which would form 2 sides and the back of the ukulele. I tested out how bendy it was. I put all 3 thin slices on a flat surface and clamped them together, then I put them in my vise and then used a hand plane to get all 3 pieces to the same width. I gave each face of each piece a sanding by hand with a 120 grit paper. I cut them to their final length on the bandsaw. Now it was time to try some wood bending methods. I started by soaking the pieces in water for a couple of days. I only needed to soak 2 of the pieces, which would be the sides. The other piece would remain straight. I used a brick to hold them down under the water. Next I needed to make a clamping template to create the curves. I printed off a shape I had drawn in SketchUp. The curves on this shape were about 20% tighter than I actually needed the curves for the wooden sides to be, as I knew that the sides would want to spring back to their original shape a little bit. And after watching Matthias Wandel's ukulele video, he arrived at the 20% figure, and he's much more clever than I am, so I just copied him. I glued this template to a piece of plywood and cut this out on the bandsaw. I'd read that the key to wood bending is moisture and heat, and the pieces of oak were pretty moist by this point. And to get the heat, I thought I'd try the microwave. Luckily my side pieces were just the right size to fit in. I thought I'd start with a 30-second blast and then test out how the wood was holding up. It felt like a pretty strange experience, but it was kind of exciting. And to my surprise, it worked really well. The wood was really pliable and bendy.
It works.
Oh my god!
So I quickly clamped it to the plywood template and let it sit and dry out fully for a couple of days. As expected, there was some spring back in the pieces after I removed the clamps, but I was pretty happy with the final shape for the sides.